Thanksgiving always had a way of making what was missing feel enormous. I walked in alone, again, and was immediately wrapped in a chorus of polite smiles and two sweet voices. "You still flying solo?" Someone teased before I'd even taken off my coat. I laughed, that rehearsed kind of laugh that doesn't touch your chest. The air smelled like cinnamon and roast turkey, but beneath it, I could already sense the judgment. I hadn't even sat down yet, and I already felt tired. My seat at the long dining table had an emptiness beside it, a glaring, unspoken accusation. No partner, no +1. Just me, with my carefully baked pie and even more carefully managed expressions. My cousins were already eyeing me like I was a math problem they couldn't solve. "Maybe you're just too picky," one of them murmured across the mashed potatoes. I smiled without my eyes. It was never about love. It was about proving I wasn't defective. I loaded my plate with stuffing in silence while the conversation swirled around me. I heard snippets, engagements, school drop-offs, mortgage rates, and then, like clockwork, "Still single?" There it was, the same script every year. No one asked how work was going, even though I'd just landed a massive campaign. No one asked if I was happy, just if I was still unclaimed, like a coat left on a store rack, waiting for someone to pick me. I chewed slowly, nodding where it seemed appropriate, but inside, I was somewhere else. Not hurt, not even angry, just weary. They didn't see me. They saw what they thought I should be. They didn't want a woman with a voice, a career, a full life. They wanted a ring, something shiny and quiet they could point at between bites of cranberry sauce. I used to think if I dressed the part, sleek dress, soft curls, flawless smile, maybe they'd talk to me differently. But year after year, it never mattered. My cousin, freshly divorced for the second time, leaned over and whispered, "You're not getting any younger, you know." I nearly choked on my wine. The irony was almost poetic, but I just nodded and bit into my roll like it held all the words I refused to say out loud. I scanned the room, wondering when my life became a game of marital musical chairs, and I was always the one left standing. My siblings had spouses, kids, stories about house renovations and PTA meetings. I had a life they didn't understand. International calls at midnight, strategy sessions that made headlines, a bank account that didn't rely on anyone else's name. But none of that mattered here. Not without someone sitting beside me at the table. My aunt chimed in, pretending to be helpful. "You should try one of those dating apps," she said, spooning green beans onto her plate. "Lower your standards a little. Just say yes more." As if finding a man was like ordering takeout. Convenient, quick, and only mildly disappointing. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I was done explaining my worth to people who only measured it in shared last names and Christmas cards with matching sweaters. The conversation moved on, but I felt it. That lingering heat in my cheeks, the sting behind my eyes I wouldn't dare blink out. I wasn't sad. I was insulted. Not one of them had asked how my week was. Not one seemed to care about anything I'd built. To them, I was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, and they couldn't stop trying to force me into a shape I'd outgrown years ago. At some point, I stopped trying to steer the conversation back to anything meaningful. It wasn't worth the detour. Every topic eventually circled back to what I lacked: a husband, a wedding date, a baby announcement. It was like being on trial for a crime I didn't commit. And the jury? Loud, smiling, and full of stuffing. I passed the gravy like it was a shield, trying to stay small, invisible, unbothered. My mother didn't say much. She rarely did. But her silence weighed more than any joke. She glanced at me once, then quickly away, like my singleness was a bruise she didn't want to look at too long. That glance used to break me. Now it just made me tired. I'd stopped trying to impress her the moment I realized she was rooting for a version of me that never existed. One who made all the right choices and none of the bold ones. As the laughter swelled around me, I took a slow sip of water and stared at the empty seat beside mine. It didn't feel like a void. It felt like space. Space I'd earned. They didn't know the peace that came with it, the power of building a life on your own terms. But I did. And that knowledge hummed quietly in my chest, a reminder that their comments said more about them than they ever would about me. So I sat there, composed, head high, fork in hand, heart heavy, but not broken. They kept talking. I kept listening. I didn't need to defend myself. Not tonight. Because I already knew what they didn't. The story wasn't over. They thought this was the end of my chapter, the lonely dinner scene. But I knew better. Something was coming, and they weren't ready for it. Dinner had barely started when the jokes sharpened. Someone raised a glass. To all the strong family men at this table, cheers followed, clinking glasses and knowing nods, as if strength only came in Y chromosomes and wedding bands. I smiled, the kind that doesn't touch your soul, just your lips. I wasn't even surprised anymore. They never toasted to independence, to resilience, to quiet strength in a storm, only to whatever made them feel traditional and tidy. Then came my aunt. She always had something lined up like a punchline with pearls. "Joan, honey, maybe it's time to lower your standards just a little. You're not in your 20s anymore." She laughed like it was helpful. I laughed because I've learned not laughing gives them power. "You know," she added, "even your cousin Marcy met someone decent on a dating app. Marcy, who thinks a podcast is a personality." I nodded, as if considering it, while internally filing it under absolutely not. The worst part wasn't the jokes. It was how casually they dropped them, like breadcrumbs in gravy. No pause, no awareness, just comments that stuck like food in your throat. My fork hovered over the sweet potatoes while my mother chimed in. At this point, I'd take anyone with a pulse for her. The room exploded into laughter. I laughed too, because not laughing would have made it worse. But inside, I felt something stretch, not break, but pull tight. I looked at her, my mother, and I didn't see malice. I saw fear. Fear that I'd grow old alone. Fear that her friends would pity her daughter. Fear that I wasn't normal. But I wasn't afraid of those things. I'd made peace with them long ago. What scared me now was how willing they all were to make someone they love feel small, just to fill their silence with sound. So I smiled, checked my watch, and waited. Every holiday felt like a test I hadn't studied for. They threw comments like darts, aiming for the softest parts of me. And maybe that's what hurt most, that they knew where those parts were. I wasn't a stranger to these people. They'd seen me grow up, fall, get back up. But somehow, year after year, they chose to reduce me to one thing, the woman who hadn't been chosen. As if that were the only chapter worth reading. I watched my cousin's husband tell a story about his latest work project, mundane, predictable, mildly inflated. They hung on every word, nodding with pride like he'd just solved climate change. I'd closed a 6-figure deal 2 weeks ago, but no one asked. No one cared, because success without a +1 didn't translate at this table. They weren't interested in what I'd built, only what I lacked. And the longer I sat there, the more invisible I felt. It wasn't just the words, it was the performance of it all. The way they staged their lives like a Hallmark movie, sweeping the messy parts under the rug with a smile and a slice of pie. They needed me to be the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happens when a woman waits too long or focuses too much on work. I was the ghost of Thanksgiving's future, haunting their comfort zones, and they dressed their fear up as humor. But I wasn't here to change their minds. I wasn't here to fight for a seat at a table that barely acknowledged I was sitting at it. I was here for the pie, for the tradition, for the faint hope that maybe this year would sting less than the last. And if it didn't, well, I had a plan. A quiet one, a good one, the kind that turned silence into strategy and mockery into a moment they'd never forget. I kept my posture straight, my face calm, the same way you hold a glass too full, careful not to spill. Every laugh around me felt like static in my ears. They weren't trying to be cruel. That's what made it worse. Their cruelty was casual, woven into jokes and clinks of silverware. And in that room full of voices, mine felt like the only one that didn't matter. So I didn't speak. I listened. Closely. Carefully. Every word was fuel. Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a pause, a breath before the crescendo, and in that moment, I wasn't shrinking. I was observing. Watching their faces, their comfort, their assumptions. I knew what was coming. I knew what none of them expected. And that was my power. Not in shouting back or storming out, but in letting them dig their own little hole, one laugh at a time, while I stayed quietly, firmly above it. My mother refilled her glass and gave me that look again, half sympathy, half discomfort, like she wanted to apologize but didn't know how. I didn't need her apology. Not tonight. I didn't need anyone at that table to see me differently, because I already did. I saw the strength in staying soft, the grace in not reacting, the beauty in being underestimated, because that's when surprise tastes the sweetest. So I laughed along with them, fork in hand, watching the minutes pass like dominoes lining up. And as I glanced toward the window, I could already feel it, the shift, the ripple before the wave. They thought I was just being quiet. What they didn't know was, I was waiting. Just as someone passed around the pecan pie, it happened. A horn, one sharp, confident beep, echoed from outside. Every conversation at the table paused, forks hovering midair. My cousin squinted toward the window. "Who the hell pulls up during dessert?" she muttered. I didn't move. I just took one last sip of wine and set my glass down with intention. The kind of intention that says everything's about to change. Chairs scraped back. Aunts and uncles made their way toward the door like moths to a mystery. From where I sat, I could already see the gleam of polished black metal through the curtains. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. A sleek, expensive, not from around here kind of car. The kind that doesn't hum, it purrs. I stood, slowly, smoothing the napkin across my lap before placing it gently on the table. Heart steady. Timing perfect. Outside, the cold air hit my skin like punctuation. Everyone was crowding the porch, trying to piece together what was happening. And then he stepped out. Tall, composed, tailored suit that whispered wealth without shouting it. Designer shoes that had never seen gravel. He shut the door, adjusted his cuff, and smiled directly at me. "I'm so sorry for being late, my love," he said, and kissed me, right there, in front of everyone. I heard it then, the silence that hits harder than sound. The kind where you can practically hear people trying to process what they just saw. Forks didn't just drop, jaws did too. I felt their confusion like a shift in weather. My aunt blinked so fast you'd think her lashes were short-circuiting. My mother's wine glass froze midair. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Because in that single moment, I became a question they didn't know how to answer. He took my hand like it belonged there. Not rushed, not performative, just natural. The kind of ease that only comes when someone actually knows you. And for the first time that night, I wasn't the one being watched with pity. I was the mystery. The twist. The woman they suddenly couldn't categorize. My cousins stared like I'd just grown a second head. My uncle nudged my aunt, whispering something they thought I wouldn't catch. But I caught it all. Alexander, yes, Alexander, looked around and offered a polite nod to the stunned audience on the porch. "Smells amazing in there," he said with a smile. "I hope I didn't miss your famous stuffing, Mrs. Elliot." He remembered her name, and just like that, my mother blinked, clearly flustered. No, of course not. We were just finishing dessert," she stammered. Her tone had shifted. Gone was the sarcasm, replaced by uncertainty. I didn't rush them. I let them stew in it a bit. The man they'd imagined, if they imagined one at all, wasn't this. He wasn't European smooth, wasn't dressed like success on two legs. They had pictured someone barely passable, someone that made my singlehood slightly less tragic. But this didn't compute. He kissed my temple and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, because I was. For the first time that night, I really was. The cold wind nipped at my arms, but I barely noticed. I could feel the shift in their energy, from mockery to mild panic. It's fascinating how quickly admiration rises when you hand people a storyline they can't predict. I didn't need to say a word. I didn't need revenge speeches or clever quips. I had something better, the truth, wrapped in a suit and a smirk, arriving precisely when he meant to. We walked back inside like the room hadn't spent the last hour dissecting my worth. Except now the air was different, heavier, charged. No one met my eyes. They were too busy trying to rearrange their understanding of me. Alexander pulled out my chair before taking his seat beside me, folding into the scene like he belonged there. And suddenly, that once empty seat felt like the most important one at the table. Someone coughed. My cousin pretended to check her phone. My mother poured herself more wine than usual. It was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that hums with tension, questions, and unsaid apologies. I could practically hear the mental math behind their wide eyes. Who is he? How did she meet him? Why didn't we know? As if I owed them that story. I didn't. I owed myself this moment. He leaned in and asked, "Should we have dessert now, or did I cause too much of a scene?" I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time that night. Not because it was funny, but because it felt good. To be seen. To be respected. To not have to explain or defend or shrink. I passed him a slice of pie, steady hands, steady heart. Across the table, someone muttered something about London. I let it hang in the air. The spotlight had shifted. I wasn't the punchline anymore. I was the plot twist. And they didn't know what to do with that. But I did. I smiled, cool and effortless, as if this wasn't the most delicious pivot in years. I could feel the next questions coming, the small talk dressed in curiosity, the sudden interest in my life. Let them ask. Let them scramble, because what they didn't realize yet was, the best part was still coming. Back at the table, I introduced him like it was no big deal. "Everyone, this is Alexander," I said, with the same ease one might use to offer someone a second helping of potatoes. "He just flew in from London." The words hung in the air for a second too long. I could see it happening. Gears turning, smiles twitching, backs straightening. They hadn't expected this version of my life. And now they were trying to recalibrate. Alexander, to his credit, was effortless. He greeted everyone with that charming calm he wears like a second skin, warm, not overdone. He asked my uncle about the brisket, complimented the centerpiece, thanked my aunt for her hospitality. It was all so natural, so quietly impressive, it disarmed them before they even realized they'd been disarmed. And then, with zero fanfare, he said it. "It's been a whirlwind week. Leading up to our launch, the board's been keeping me on my toes." And just like that, the bomb dropped. CEO, global tech firm, launch. My cousin choked on her water, trying to act like she wasn't eavesdropping. My mother's mouth opened slightly before she caught herself. And me? I just buttered a roll, calm as ever, because while they were busy being stunned by him, I knew what they were really stunned by. That I was connected to someone like him. That I hadn't just found a date. I had built a life they never imagined for me. No one said anything cruel anymore. The table had gone from snarky to stunned in a matter of minutes. The same people who had been dismissing me now clung to every word that came out of his mouth. Questions started bubbling, polite, eager, insecure. My uncle asked about investment strategies. My cousin wanted to know if he'd ever been to Berlin. And all the while, I sat there, answering only when I felt like it. Because sometimes silence says everything you need it to. I could see it in their eyes, the recalculating. The same relatives who once pitied me were now searching for ways to align themselves with me. My cousin, who hadn't asked me a personal question in 3 years, suddenly wanted to know how we met. I gave her the short version. "At work," I said with a shrug. Technically true, just not in the way they assumed. I let them wonder. I let them lean in. I wasn't hiding anything, but I wasn't performing either. Alexander, still charming, turned every question back on them. "And what do you do?" he asked my uncle, genuinely curious. It threw them off, being seen like that, especially by someone they now wanted to impress. The balance of power had shifted so gently it was almost poetic. No drama, no revenge speech. Just me, seated exactly where I'd always been, only now they were seeing me through a new lens. A lens I never needed them to look through, but it felt good that they did. My mother, bless her heart, tried to recover. She offered Alexander a second slice of pie and asked about his favorite dish. Her voice trembled slightly, a mix of pride and panic. I could tell she was both thrilled and confused. Thrilled that I hadn't ended up alone, and confused about how she never saw it coming. I smiled at her, gently, not to punish, but to reassure her that I wasn't angry. Just done waiting for permission to be proud of myself. And maybe that's what stunned them most. That I didn't gloat, that I didn't rub it in. I just existed, fully and without apology. For years, they only saw the parts of me that didn't fit their mold. Tonight, they were seeing everything else. The strength, the grace, the woman who stopped needing their approval long before this dinner. And that quiet, grounded presence? That's what shook them more than anything Alexander could say. They kept trying to catch up, to the moment, to the realization, to the version of me they'd overlooked. Alexander didn't name drop, didn't boast. He didn't need to. Every word he said was soaked in self-assurance, the kind that doesn't need a spotlight. And I think that's when it really hit them. I hadn't just brought someone successful. I had brought someone who matched me. Not saved me, not elevated me. Matched me. On purpose. By choice. The table that once felt like a jury now looked like a panel of puzzled spectators. My cousin asked if Alexander had ever thought about investing locally. My aunt offered him more wine, and suddenly, it was like I didn't need to be explained anymore. I wasn't the punchline. I wasn't the warning sign. I was someone they had underestimated, deeply, and now couldn't quite look in the eye without wondering what else they had missed. I didn't interrupt. I didn't command attention. But I let my silence stretch, just long enough for it to be noticed. Because in a family that thrived on commentary, my quiet was louder than any toast. I looked around the table and realized something else too. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was simply done performing. And that freedom? It tasted better than any dessert they could serve. Alexander reached for my hand under the table, warm and grounding, and I gave it a small squeeze. Let them talk. Let them piece together the past with their shaky timelines and misplaced assumptions. I had no need to correct them, because the woman they had mocked just an hour ago, the woman they dismissed without ever knowing, had now taken her place at the head of the story, and the final scene was still on its way. The night was winding down, coats were being gathered, leftover pies were boxed up. But I wasn't in a hurry. I had one more gift to leave behind, something sweeter than dessert. Alexander stood beside me, saying polite goodbyes, and then, right there in front of everyone, he turned to me and said it. I still can't believe how you handled that investor dinner last week. You're brilliant. And just like that, the air cracked open. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. That sentence. That reveal. I felt it ripple down the table like a cold draft. My aunt stopped mid-sip. My cousin tilted her head slightly, pretending to understand. But I could see it in their faces, confusion bending into realization. This wasn't just about who I was dating. This was about what I had been all along. The strategist, the powerhouse, the woman they never saw coming. Alexander, blissfully unaware of the chaos he'd just triggered, or maybe very aware, kept talking. Your pitch deck? Still the best I've seen all year. My uncle, who once joked I should try marrying into business instead of working in it, went completely silent. My mother blinked like she'd just missed a chapter. She hadn't missed it, she just never read past the headline. I'd given them all the pages, they just didn't bother to turn them. I smiled, not wide, not smug, just enough. The kind of smile that says, I told you nothing, and still, you know everything now. It wasn't about rubbing it in. It was about reclaiming the space they thought I didn't deserve. I hugged my mother goodbye. Her arms were stiffer than usual. I leaned in close and whispered, "Next year, maybe the jokes won't age as well as I did." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. I'd already said enough. As we walked toward the door, I could feel their eyes on my back, not with judgment this time, but something closer to awe. Or maybe regret. Funny how fast people rewrite their memories when the narrative changes. The same people who joked about dating apps were now wondering how they missed all the signs. But there weren't any signs. Because I never needed them to see it. I just needed to live it. On my terms. Alexander helped me with my coat, then casually thanked my aunt for the meal. "It was perfect," he said with that smooth, reassuring tone. She blushed. My aunt, the same woman who once offered me her old bridesmaid dress just in case I ever got lucky. Everyone was suddenly kinder, softer, more curious. They weren't just seeing him differently. They were seeing me through him. And yet, he was just the mirror. The reflection of everything I'd already become. No one dared mention my singleness now. No one reminded me of my age, my eggs, or my empty ring finger. That seat at the table? It wasn't empty anymore, but not because it needed filling. Because I had finally made them understand that I'd never needed a seat next to someone. I was the table. I had built my life from the ground up, while they waited for someone else to hand them one. As we stepped out into the night, the cold hit my face like clarity. Crisp, sharp, real. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Behind me was the echo of their own assumptions crumbling, one by one. I wasn't their project. I wasn't their embarrassment. I was the ending they never saw coming, not because I changed, but because they never bothered to look closely enough before. In the car, with the heat humming softly and the outside world muted by tinted windows, Alexander reached for my hand again. "You were incredible tonight," he said. Not like it was a performance, but like it was a truth. I didn't answer right away. I stared out the window for a moment, watching my childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror. I had spent so many years there trying to be enough. Tonight, I finally stopped trying. And that somehow made me more than enough. I thought of all the past Thanksgivings, of forced smiles and shrinking myself to fit inside conversations that were never built to include me. I remembered every comment, every pitying glance, every empty seat they thought defined me. And now those memories didn't sting. They felt distant, like echoes in a room I no longer lived in. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply free. And that freedom was its own kind of power. They invited me expecting a quiet embarrassment. Something to gossip about later over coffee and recycled jokes. But I didn't give them that. I gave them something else entirely, a version of myself they never bothered to imagine. Not flashy, not loud, just grounded, sure, and unapologetically real. I didn't change for them. I didn't show up for revenge. I showed up because I belonged there, and I finally knew it. As the car turned the corner and their house disappeared from view, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I wasn't the woman they expected. I was the woman they all secretly wished they were, or had. And that was the real ending to this story.